She's just a nurse, the officer smirked, until she took command under fire. The dust of forward operating base Nightingale settled on everything. A fine, gritty powder that coated skin, filled lungs, and muted the world to shades of beige and brown. Captain Elena Rostova stepped off the transport helicopter, the rotor wash whipping her dark hair across a face that seemed carved from impassive stone. She carried a single duffel bag. A young corporal, his face still soft with the memory of home, met her at the edge of the landing zone. "Captain Rostova? I'm Corporal Tanaka. Welcome to the Rock." Med tensed this way. He pointed toward a large, khaki-colored structure sagging slightly in the oppressive heat. She gave a single, sharp nod, her eyes not on the tent but scanning the perimeter, tracing the lines of HESCO barriers and the placement of the guard towers that punctuated the razor wire like grim punctuation marks. Her gaze was methodical, a silent inventory of strengths and, more importantly, vulnerabilities. The base was nestled in a valley, a precarious position commanded by jagged peaks on three sides. A strategic mistake obvious to anyone who had ever had to defend such a place. Colonel Marcus Thorne watched her approach from the shaded doorway of the command post. He held a ceramic mug of coffee, a small bastion of civilization in the wild. He saw a woman in her late 40s, her frame lean but not frail, her movements economical. He saw the captain's bars on her collar and the medic's caduceus insignia. The smirk was internal, a flicker of private amusement. A transfer from a rear-echelon hospital in Germany, her file said. An administrative shuffle to get an aging officer her field time before retirement. He saw a liability, another body to keep safe, not an asset. "Just a nurse," he murmured to his executive officer, a major who knew better than to disagree. "Make sure she knows where the bandages are." From across the compound, Elena's eyes briefly met his. They held no warmth, no intimidation, just a flat, unnerving stillness, as if she were looking at a map feature, not a man. For a disquieting second, Thorne felt assessed, measured, and filed away. Then she turned her attention back to Corporal Tanaka, her posture relaxing just enough to put the young soldier at ease. A distant crackle of static from the command post's long-range comms unit broke the moment, a sound so common it went almost unnoticed. But Elena's head tilted a fraction of a degree, a predator sensing a change in the wind. The turning point had not yet arrived, but she could hear it whispering on the edge of the world. She had hoped for quiet. She had hoped for the simple, honest work of mending bodies, a penance for a past spent breaking them. But the mountains ringing the valley were indifferent to hope. They only cared for angles, sight lines, and the brutal calculus of combat, a language she knew better than her own name. Her arrival was not a shuffle. It was a deployment, and though no one here knew it, the most dangerous weapon in the entire valley had just stepped off the helicopter. Colonel Thorne believed in order, in hierarchy, and in the clear, unambiguous lines of authority that made the military function. He saw the world as a series of problems to be solved by the correct application of force and procedure. Captain Elena Rostova, standing before him in the morning briefing, did not fit neatly into his procedural world. She was quiet, her hands clasped loosely behind her back, her gaze fixed on the tactical map projected onto the screen, a map showing the very same vulnerabilities she had identified upon her arrival. "Captain Rostova," Thorne began, his voice carrying the easy condescension of a man who had never had his authority seriously challenged. "Glad you could join us. Your file says you've spent the last few years at Landstuhl. Paper cuts and ski injuries, I imagine. Things are a bit more kinetic out here." A few of the junior officers around the table chuckled dutifully. Elena's expression did not change. "I'm aware, Colonel." Her voice was low, devoid of inflection. It seemed to absorb the sound in the room rather than add to it. Thorne pressed on, enjoying the performance. "Your primary role will be overseeing the aid station. Sergeant Miller has it running well enough, but I want an officer's eyes on the inventory. Keep the aspirin counted and the gauze sterile. Can you handle that?" The question was a deliberate insult, reducing her captaincy to a stock clerk's duties. "Yes, Colonel," she said. The silence that followed was heavy. She offered no defense, no protest. She simply stood there, a pillar of unsettling calm. He had expected a flicker of indignation, a protest about her rank or experience. He received nothing, and her placid acceptance was more unnerving than any argument. "Good," Thorne said, turning back to the map. "Now, for the rest of you, patrol schedules are." He continued the briefing, but his focus was fractured. He kept glancing at the nurse, who had not moved. She was still studying the map, but her focus seemed to have narrowed on a specific sector, the Kylon Pass, a treacherous route that cut through the northern ridge. Her eyes traced the topographical lines, her focus so intense it was almost palpable. He found himself wanting to ask what she was looking at, a ridiculous impulse he immediately suppressed. She was a nurse. What could she possibly see that his own seasoned tacticians had missed? After the briefing, as the other officers filed out, Thorne stopped her. "One more thing, Captain. We have a VIP visit in 2 weeks. A congressional delegation. The entire base needs to be spotless. I want you to personally supervise the sanitation details for the common areas. Latrines, mess hall, the works. It was a flagrant misuse of a commissioned officer. A task for a junior NCO. It was a power play, pure and simple. He wanted to see her break, to see a crack in that stoic facade." Elena looked at him, her dark eyes holding his for a full 3 seconds. He felt that same sense of being measured again. "Understood, Colonel," she said, then turned and walked out, her footsteps making no sound on the gritty floor. Thorne stood alone in the empty briefing room, the smirk he had worn earlier now feeling tight and brittle. He had asserted his authority, yet he felt a profound sense of loss, as if he had thrown a rock at a mountain and the mountain had not even noticed. He was in command, but for the first time in a long time he did not feel entirely in control. Elena did not protest her new duties. She acquired a checklist and a cleaning roster from a bewildered supply sergeant and began her work. She supervised the scrubbing of the latrines with the same dispassionate focus she had given the tactical map. She inspected the mess hall kitchen, pointing out a small patch of mold behind a freezer unit that everyone else had missed for months. The soldiers assigned to the sanitation details, initially resentful of being supervised by a captain for such menial work, found her presence strangely calming. She didn't shout or condescend. She spoke quietly, giving clear, simple instructions. "PFC Jamil," she said to a young woman scrubbing a floor. "Use shorter strokes and put your weight into the brush. It's more efficient." Private First Class Aisha Jamil, expecting a reprimand, looked up in surprise. She tried it and the grime came away easier. "Yes, ma'am," she said, a note of respect creeping into her voice. But as her hands performed the mindless tasks, her mind was a whirlwind of activity. The FOB was a puzzle, and she was assembling the pieces. While checking the plumbing behind the barracks, she noted the main water line was exposed, running alongside a fuel pipe. A single well-placed explosive could cripple the base's 2 most vital resources simultaneously. While walking the perimeter under the guise of inspecting trash disposal sites, she paced the distance between the guard towers. 300 meters. Too far. It created a dead zone in the center of the span that the tower-mounted machine guns couldn't effectively cover, a perfect infiltration point under the cover of darkness. She observed the patrol schedules. They were predictable. Wolverine 1 left at 0600, returned at 1100. Wolverine 2 at 1200, returning at 1700. The routes were barely altered day to day. It was an invitation for an ambush. Her mind, trained for a decade in the art of unseen warfare, saw every flaw, every lazy assumption, every corner cut in the name of routine. She was a ghost walking through a house, noting every unlocked door and open window. In the evenings, she sat in the med tent, meticulously organizing supplies. She arranged suture kits, morphine syrettes, and chest seals not by regulation, but by triage priority. The items for catastrophic hemorrhage went on the top shelf, easily accessible. The items for minor wounds were lower down. Sergeant Miller, who had run the station for a year, watched her with a mixture of confusion and admiration. "Never seen it done that way, Captain," he said. "It's faster," was all Elena replied. One afternoon, while sitting outside the tent cleaning surgical instruments, she listened. Not just to the sounds of the base, but to the silence between them. She heard the faint, rhythmic chirp of a specific model of encrypted radio being tested in the command post. She also heard the subtle, intermittent static that plagued the comms link to the Kylon Pass sector, the one she had noticed on the map. The techs called it atmospheric interference. Elena knew better. It wasn't random. It was patterned, a faint electronic heartbeat that suggested signal degradation from a jamming device, not weather. It was weak, unsophisticated, but it was there. She said nothing. It was not her place. Her place was here with the bandages and the antiseptic supervising the latrine cleaning. She was just a nurse. But she took a small, weatherproof notebook from her pocket and made a precise entry. Kylon Pass. Frequency 46 GHz. Intermittent jamming signature. Probable enemy observation post monitoring comms traffic. High risk for patrols. She closed the book. She had done her observation. The data was collected. Now, all she could do was wait for the inevitable test that she knew was coming. The pattern was always the same. Observation, probing, and then the attack. The call came just after 1400 hours. Watchtower 2, this is CIC. We've lost contact with Wolverine 3-inch. The voice over the base-wide speakers was tight with forced calm. Last known position was Grid 7-49er. Kylon Pass. An uneasy quiet fell over the FOB. Wolverine 3 was a four-man reconnaissance team that had taken the midday patrol slot. The Kylon Pass. Elena, who was showing Corporal Tanaka the most efficient way to apply a tourniquet using a training dummy, froze for a fraction of a second. Her hands, steady as stone moments before, paused over the synthetic limb. The coordinates were precisely within the zone of intermittent signal loss she had noted. Colonel Thorne's voice crackled over the net a moment later, sharp and commanding. All stations, this is Colonel Thorne. Comms, get me Wolverine 3 back on the line. Use the primary satellite uplink. Boost the signal in the Command Information Center, or CIC. A low-grade panic began to simmer. The air, usually cool and controlled, grew thick with tension. A young lieutenant frantically worked the main console, his face pale. No joy, sir. Primary and secondary channels are dead. It's just static. Heavy static, a massive sandstorm. A haboob was visible on the horizon. A towering wall of brown rolling toward the valley. The wind was already picking up, howling through the gaps in the mountains, carrying with it the grit that would soon blind sensors and choke engines. The storms interfering with the high-frequency bands. The comms tech offered weakly. Thorne slammed his hand on the console. I don't need excuses. I need solutions. Where is my quick reaction force? Standing by, sir, a major replied. But we can't send them in blind. The storm will cut visibility to near zero. If we don't know where Wolverine 3 is, the QRF will be just as lost. Or worse, fly right into the same trap. The logic was sound, but it felt like a death sentence for the missing patrol. Panic began to curdle into despair. Thorne paced the CIC, his authority fraying with every passing second of silence from the radio. His orders became contradictory. Try the old relay network. Scramble the air assets. Somebody get me a goddamn location. His commands were shotgun blasts of desperation, lacking focus or a coherent strategy. He was reacting to the crisis, not managing it. Outside, Elena finished her demonstration with Corporal Tanaka. Hold pressure for at least 3 minutes after tightening, she said, her voice a low, steady anchor in the rising sea of anxiety. She handed the tourniquet to the corporal. You try. As Tanaka fumbled with the strap, his hands shaking slightly, Elena walked calmly toward the CIC. She didn't run. Her pace was deliberate, measured. She saw the chaos through the window, the frantic gestures and the strained faces. She saw Thorne, a man accustomed to being the loudest voice in the room, being drowned out by a problem he couldn't shout into submission. The pressure was building, a spring coiling tighter and tighter. The men in the CIC were trained for combat, but this was a different kind of enemy. Uncertainty. It was a foe that couldn't be shot or bombed. It had to be outthought. And as Thorne's voice grew hoarse with futile orders, Elena knew that no one in that room was equipped for this fight. No one but her. She stood at the door of the CIC, unnoticed in the maelstrom, and waited for the precise moment to act. She didn't ask for permission. She simply walked into the CIC as if she belonged there. The guards at the door, transfixed by the drama inside, barely registered her presence. The room was a cacophony of panicked voices and the hiss of dead air from the speakers. Colonel Thorne was berating a young comms officer, his face flushed with anger and fear. Elena ignored him. She moved past the main console to a dusty, forgotten corner of the room where a deprecated auxiliary satellite array terminal sat dormant. It was an older model, slower and less secure, phased out years ago but never removed. The soldiers considered it a relic. Elena considered it a tool. Corporal Tanaka, having followed her from the med tent, watched in stunned silence from the doorway. He saw her fingers fly across the keypad, her movements precise and economical. She wasn't guessing. She was executing a procedure. "What are you doing, Captain?" A lieutenant finally noticed her and demanded, his voice cracking. "That unit is offline." "Not anymore," Elena said without looking up. She bypassed the standard boot-up sequence, accessing the root command line. She rerouted the dish's power from a secondary generator, isolating it from the main grid that was fluctuating under the strain of the base's storm preparations. Thorne turned, his face a mask of fury. "What in God's name do you think you're doing, nurse? Get out of my CIC." Elena's fingers didn't stop. She typed in a long string of alphanumeric code, a manual override for the system's encryption protocols. "Colonel," she said, her voice calm and level, cutting through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "Your primary comms use a frequency-hopping algorithm that is vulnerable to wide-spectrum jamming, especially with atmospheric distortion. You're trying to shout through a hurricane." She brought up a new screen, a raw data feed from the old satellite. It was a waterfall of static. "I'm not shouting," she continued, her eyes scanning the cascade of noise. "I'm listening." She began applying a series of digital filters, her own custom-written code from a life she had left behind. Each filter peeled away a layer of static, isolating specific frequencies. She wasn't looking for Wolverine 3's powerful encrypted signal. She was looking for its ghost, the faint, almost imperceptible echo of a personal locator beacon, a device that transmitted on a low-power, constant frequency that was easy to miss but difficult to jam completely. The room fell silent. Even Thorne was quiet, his anger replaced by a dumbfounded confusion. The other soldiers watched, mesmerized, as the wall of static on her screen began to resolve. A thin, wavering line appeared, a fragile pulse in the electronic void. "There," she whispered. It was barely a signal, more a flicker of existence. But it was enough. She triangulated the signal's origin against the satellite's last known handshake with the patrol's equipment. The process took less than 90 seconds. She scribbled a set of coordinates on a notepad, tore off the sheet, and walked over to the main tactical map. She didn't look at Thorne. She handed the note to the major in charge of the QRF. "Grid 7-6 Bravo, 2 kilometers northeast of their last known position. They're in a ravine, using the terrain to shield their beacon from ground-based jammers." She then pointed to a spot on the map just above the ravine. "The enemy ambush is likely positioned here on this ridge, using the storm as cover for their approach and withdrawal." She turned and handed a second note to Corporal Tanaka, who still stood by the door. On it was written a single word, "Ambush." Then, without another word, she walked out of the CIC. The door swung shut behind her, leaving a room full of stunned officers staring at the coordinates she had plucked from the heart of the storm. The silence in the CIC lingered for a full 10 seconds after she left. It was the major who broke it, his voice filled with a new, uncertain energy. "Sir?" he asked Colonel Thorne, holding up the slip of paper. Thorne stared at the door Elena had just exited, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. A nurse. A nurse had just bypassed his entire comms team and dissected a crisis that had paralyzed his command. It was impossible. It was humiliating. "It's probably nothing," Thorne snapped, his pride stinging. A lucky guess, sir. The major pressed, his tone firmer now. It's the only lead we have. The storm is getting worse. We have to act, he pointed to the map. Her tactical assessment of the ambush point makes sense. It's the best firing position overlooking that ravine. Reluctantly, Thorne gave the order. Fine. Send the QRF. But you tell them this is a probable wild goose chase. I want them back here in 30 minutes. With or without, the two gunships lifted off into the swirling brown haze, their rotors beating against the thickening air. In the CIC, everyone watched the drone feed, which was already degrading due to the storm. They saw the helicopters descend toward the coordinates Elena had provided. For 20 agonizing minutes, there was nothing but static-laced video of rocks and sand. Thorne began to smirk, a vindicated look on his face. I told you, a waste of fuel. And then, the QRF commander's voice, strained but clear, cut through the speakers. Havoc 1 to CIC, we have visual. Multiple survivors, grid 7-6 Bravo, in the ravine. They're pinned down. We are engaging enemy positions on the ridge to the north, exactly as briefed. I repeat, exactly as briefed. Ambush confirmed. A collective gasp went through the room. Thorne's face went slack, the smirk evaporating. On the tactical screen, the friendly blue icon of Wolverine 3, which had been blinking uncertainly, now became a solid marker at the new coordinates. It was real. She had been right. The rescue was swift. The gunships laid down a torrent of fire on the enemy position, scattering them and allowing the medics to rappel down to the wounded soldiers. They brought back 2 survivors, both injured but alive. The other 2 members of Wolverine 3 had been killed in the initial attack. Later, in the debrief, one of the survivors, a sergeant with shrapnel in his leg, recounted the event from a cot in the med tent. They came out of nowhere, sir. Our comms just died. We were blind. They hit us hard. We fell back into that ditch. It was the only cover we had. We thought we were dead. Then we heard the choppers. It was a miracle. Colonel Thorne stood at the back of the tent, listening. His eyes kept drifting to Captain Rostova. She was calmly cleaning the sergeant's wounds, her movements efficient and gentle. She hadn't said a word about her role in the rescue. She didn't seem to want any credit. She was acting as if all she had done was apply a bandage. The whispers started almost immediately. Soldiers who had been in the CIC told the story to their friends. The tale of the quiet nurse who walked into chaos and pulled a miracle out of thin air spread through the barracks and guard posts. Corporal Tanaka became an unwitting celebrity. Asked again and again, what did she do? How did she know? All he could say was, I don't know. She was just calm, like she'd done it 100 times before. The way the other soldiers looked at Elena changed. The dismissal was gone, replaced by a mixture of awe, suspicion, and intense curiosity. They gave her a wider berth. Their greetings were more formal. They watched her as she walked across the compound, this unassuming woman who now seemed to be more than she appeared. Thorne felt the shift in his own command. He had been shown up, his authority undermined not by insubordination, but by sheer, undeniable competence. He looked at Elena, now restocking a shelf with 4 bags, and a question burned in his mind, a question he was almost afraid to ask. Who are you? The enemy, stung by the failed ambush and the improbable rescue of the survivors, grew bolder. They had probed the FOB's defenses and found them wanting. 2 nights later, the real test came. The attack began not with a single shot, but with a coordinated barrage of mortar fire. The first rounds landed near the fuel depot, the explosions shaking the ground and sending plumes of fire into the night sky. The base alarms blared, a frantic, shrieking cry in the darkness. Chaos erupted. Soldiers, roused from their sleep, scrambled for their gear and their posts. The CIC became a vortex of confused reports. Mortar impact near the west gate. Perimeter breach in Sector Gamma. Comms are down with Tower 4. Colonel Thorne stood in the center of the CIC, shouting orders, but his command structure was crumbling under the weight of the simultaneous attacks. His voice, once a tool of absolute authority, was now just more noise in the cacophony. The enemy had chosen their point of attack well. Sector Gamma, the section of the perimeter with the widest gap between guard towers, the very same dead zone Elena had identified days earlier. In the med tent, Elena worked with methodical speed. The first casualties were already being brought in, soldiers hit by shrapnel from the mortar rounds. She moved from one to the next, her hands sure and steady as she applied pressure dressings, inserted chest tubes, and administered morphine. PFC Aisha Jamil, her sanitation detail partner, was now acting as an assistant, her face pale with fear but her hands kept busy by Elena's calm instructions. Jamil, pressure on this wound. Tanaka, get me 3 more units of O-negative. Suddenly, a runner burst into the tent, his face covered in soot. Captain, the breach in Gamma is bad. Lieutenant Howard is dead. Sergeant Chun is down. We have no leadership. We're getting cut to pieces. Elena finished tying off a bandage on a wounded soldier's arm. She looked at the runner, her eyes clear and focused amidst the swirling chaos. Then she looked at the dozen soldiers huddled in the relative safety of the aid station. A mix of walking wounded, medics, and support staff, all of them terrified. She made a decision. Sergeant Miller, she said to the senior medic, you have the tent. Triage and stabilize. Jamil, Tanaka, you're with me. She strode to a large medical supply locker and kicked it open. But she didn't grab bandages. She pulled out 3 M4 rifles stashed there for emergency defense and a radio. She tossed 1 rifle to Tanaka, 1 to Jamil. She checked the action on her own with a practiced, fluid motion that spoke of thousands of hours of training. What are we doing, ma'am? Tanaka asked, his voice trembling as he held the weapon. We're going to fix the problem, Elena said. She turned to the collection of frightened soldiers. Her voice cut through their fear, sharp and clear, with an authority that had been absent from the command net. You 5, grab stretchers and follow us. You will be my casevac team. You do exactly as I say when I say it. We are going to that breach. It was a higher stakes challenge, far beyond finding a lost patrol. This was not about electronics and signals. This was about blood and fire and leading terrified soldiers in the heart of a fight. As she stepped out of the med tent into the hellscape of explosions and tracer fire, she wasn't Captain Rostova, the nurse. She was someone else entirely. Her posture changed. Her shoulders squared, her eyes narrowed, scanning the battlefield with a predator's gaze. She moved with a purpose that was terrifying and beautiful to behold. The quiet nurse was gone. Commander had taken her place. Elena led her small, cobbled-together unit towards Sector Gamma, moving through the darkness with an uncanny sense of the battlefield's rhythm. She used the deafening crump of mortar impacts to cover their sprints from one piece of cover to the next. Tracer rounds zipped through the air around them, but she moved as if she could see their paths before they were fired. Jamil, suppress that rooftop, she ordered, pointing toward a building where muzzle flashes were winking. Short, controlled bursts. Don't waste ammunition, the young private, who had been scrubbing floors under Elena's supervision just days before, now found herself laying down effective suppressive fire, her fear replaced by the clear, simple purpose of the order. They reached the edge of the breach. The scene was one of pure carnage. The HESCO barriers were torn apart, and several American soldiers lay dead or dying. The defenders, leaderless and disorganized, were pinned down behind a disabled Humvee, returning fire sporadically and without effect. The enemy was pouring through the gap, threatening to split the base in two. Elena didn't hesitate. Tanaka, you have the radio. Patch into the command net. Relay my instructions exactly as I give them. Use the call sign Nightingale 6. It was the designation for the medical station, the only one she could officially claim. The rest of you with me. She led a flanking maneuver, crawling on her belly through a ditch that the panicked defenders had overlooked. She positioned her small team of support soldiers and walking wounded, turning them into an effective firing line. Fire on my command. Aim for the center of the breach. We are going to seal it with lead. Meanwhile, a resupply helicopter that had been caught on the ground by the attack was powering up its engines. Its crew chief, a grizzled sergeant major named Davies, preparing for a desperate takeoff. Grizz Davies had been in the special operations community for 30 years. He was a living legend, a man who had forgotten more about combat than most soldiers ever learned. As he scanned the chaotic battlefield, his eyes locked onto the small team flanking the breach. He saw their precise movements, their disciplined fire control. And he saw their leader, a woman. He zoomed in with his helmet-mounted optics and his blood ran cold. He knew that posture. He knew that economy of motion. He had seen it once before, years ago, in a dusty corner of the world that wasn't on any official map. "Get me the FOB commander," he roared to his pilot over the intercom. In the CIC, Thorne was watching his command disintegrate on the tactical display. The red icons of the enemy were flowing deeper into the base. Then Tanaka's voice, hesitant but clear, came over the command net. "All stations, this is Nightingale 6. Be advised, we are establishing a crossfire at the Gamma breach. Direct all friendly fire 100 meters north of the disabled Humvee." Thorne was about to demand who was giving tactical orders when the pilot of the helicopter broke in on the same channel. "Colonel Thorne, this is Chopper 7-9. My crew chief needs to talk to you. It's urgent." Thorne, exasperated, yelled, "What is it?" The voice that came next was gravelly, old, and filled with an authority that transcended rank. "Colonel," Sergeant Major Davies said, his voice cutting through the static, "you have Spectre on the ground. I repeat, Spectre is active on your perimeter. Acknowledge." The name meant nothing to Thorne. "Who the hell is Spectre?" he demanded. There was a pause, filled with the sound of machine gun fire. Then Davies's voice came back, laced with disbelief and fury. "Captain Elena Rostova, Special Operations Command. That's not a nurse, you idiot. She's a legend. She's Spectre." The call sign echoed in the stunned silence of the CIC. Spectre. A ghost? A phantom. Thorne's mind raced. He remembered her transfer file now, the one he had dismissed. There was a classified addendum, heavily redacted, that he hadn't bothered to read closely. He scrambled to his terminal, his hands shaking, and pulled up her file. He entered his highest-level security clearance. The redactions vanished. He saw a list of operations that made his blood run cold. Operation Nightfall, Project Chimera. He saw commendations for valor so secret they were never entered into the public record. He saw her last official title, Field Commander, 7th Special Operations Group, Mission Designation, Ghost Protocol. His eyes fell on the final entry before her transfer to medical. A psychological evaluation recommending a low-stress, non-combat role for recovery from operational exhaustion. He had put a ghost in charge of scrubbing toilets. And now that ghost was single-handedly saving his base. The revelation of Elena's identity sent a shockwave through the command structure. On the battlefield, her calm, precise orders, relayed by Corporal Tanaka under the call sign Nightingale 6, began to turn the tide. "QRF, this is Nightingale 6. Reposition to coordinates 8-1 Alpha. You have a clear line of fire on the enemy's secondary assault team from there. Engage at will the quick reaction force, which had been fighting pockets of resistance blindly, now had a director, a battlefield conductor who could see the entire symphony of chaos and orchestrate it. They moved to the new position, and just as she'd predicted, they found a large group of enemy fighters massing for a second push. They opened fire, devastating the unprepared force. At the breach, Elena's small team laid down a withering field of fire. Her commands were simple, direct. Shift fire left. Target the heavy weapon. Jamil, reload. You too, she said to a pair of terrified supply clerks she had armed. Watch our rear. She seemed to be everywhere at once, correcting a soldier's grip, pointing out a new target, all while firing her own rifle with deadly accuracy. She wasn't fighting with rage or adrenaline, but with a cold, terrifying clarity. Each shot was a calculation. Each order was a move on a chessboard. Sergeant Major Davies, watching from the hovering helicopter, provided overwatch, his voice now a running commentary of awe on the command net. Spectre is moving to consolidate the line. Holy hell, did you see that shot? She's retaking the breach with a handful of cooks and mechanics. Colonel Thorne, humbled and silent in the CIC, simply listened. He relayed her orders to the rest of the base without question. Her call sign, Nightingale 6, became the sole source of command and control. The authority she now wielded was not granted by rank or position. It was seized through sheer, undeniable competence under fire. Within 30 minutes, the momentum of the attack was broken. The enemy, caught in a series of well-sprung traps orchestrated by Elena, began a disorganized retreat. The flow of red icons on the tactical map reversed, bleeding back out of the breach. Elena led a final push to secure the perimeter, her movements fluid and certain. As the last of the enemy fighters disappeared into the darkness, an eerie silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the crackle of fires and the groans of the wounded. The attack was over. The base was held. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale, gray light over the scene of devastation, Colonel Thorne walked out of the CIC. He moved past the smoking wreckage and the exhausted soldiers, his eyes searching for one person. He found her near the now-secured breach. The commander was gone, and the nurse had returned. Elena was kneeling beside a young soldier, the same one whose arm she had bandaged earlier, giving him water from her own canteen. Her face was smudged with soot, her uniform torn, but her expression was once again impassive, her hands gentle. The entire FOB seemed to hold its breath. The soldiers who had fought alongside her, the pilots in the sky, the technicians in the CIC, they all watched. Thorne walked until he stood directly in front of her. She looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. There was no accusation in them, no "I told you so." There was nothing but a profound, weary calm. Thorne didn't speak. Words were inadequate, insulting. He was a colonel, she a captain. But in that moment, rank was meaningless. He was a student before a master. Slowly, deliberately, he brought his hand up in a crisp, perfect salute. It was an admission of error, a gesture of profound respect, an apology. Elena, still kneeling, simply nodded once. It was all the acknowledgement he needed or deserved. Then something remarkable happened. Sergeant Major Davies, standing nearby, snapped to attention and rendered his own salute. Then Corporal Tanaka and PFC Jamil. Then the members of the QRF. One by one, every soldier on that battlefield who could stand turned to face the quiet nurse and saluted. It was a silent, thunderous ovation, a recognition of the ghost who had walked among them and saved them all. In the days that followed, a new kind of order settled over FOB Nightingale. The repairs to the perimeter were made according to a new design, one that eliminated the dead zones and fortified the weak points. The patrol schedules became random, the routes unpredictable. The changes were implemented by Colonel Thorne, but the ideas were not his. They came from a series of unsigned, handwritten notes that appeared on his desk each morning, detailing tactical and logistical improvements with breathtaking clarity and efficiency. No one saw who left them, but everyone knew their source. Elena returned to the med tent. She said nothing of the battle, nothing of her past. She went back to organizing supplies, treating minor injuries, and overseeing the sanitation of the base. To the new soldiers rotating in, she was just Captain Rostova, the quiet, efficient head nurse. But to those who had been there that night, she was a living legend. They spoke her name in hushed, reverent tones. They called her Spectre. The fear she had once inspired was replaced by a deep, unwavering respect. They still gave her a wide berth, not out of suspicion, but out of deference. They would fall silent when she entered a room, and they would watch her with a kind of protective awe, as if guarding a sacred secret. One afternoon, Colonel Thorne entered the med tent. He looked older, humbled. The arrogance had been stripped from him, leaving behind a weary but wiser officer. He walked over to the small table where Elena was cleaning a set of surgical tools. He didn't speak for a moment, simply watching her sure, steady hands. He placed a hardened satellite phone on the table beside her instruments. It was a direct-line model, capable of reaching the highest levels of command without being routed through the base's comms. "It's for you," Thorne said, his voice quiet, respectful. "A direct line to Sockham." They've been trying to reach you. They want a full after-action report on the engagement. From you," he paused, then added, "they also said to tell you, your convalescence is over if you want it to be. They want you back." The offer hung in the air. A return to the world of shadows, of high-stakes operations, of being Spectre. It was a return to the life she had been forged in, the life she had nearly been consumed by. Thorne turned and left without waiting for a reply. He knew the decision wasn't his to witness. Elena stared at the satellite phone for a long time. It was a key, a door back to her old life. She could pick it up and once again be the ghost, the weapon. Her fingers lightly brushed against the cool plastic casing. Then her gaze drifted past the phone, through the open flap of the tent, to the rugged mountains that encircled the valley. The setting sun painted their peaks in hues of orange and purple. A gentle breeze rustled the canvas. On the ground just outside, a single, spent brass casing from the battle lay half buried in the dust, glinting in the last light of day. It was a small, silent testament to the chaos she had commanded, the lives she had saved. She looked from the phone back to the casing, and then to her own hands. She picked up a fresh, sterile bandage and began to neatly roll it. Her work was here. Her penance, or perhaps her peace, was in the quiet, tangible act of mending, not breaking. The satellite phone remained on the table, silent. Her choice was made. The respect she had earned was absolute, but her dignity was her own, found not in the roar of battle, but in the quiet purpose of a nurse's hands.